Hello, everyone. Hope you all doing okay during this pandemic we're having. I know everybody's stuck inside, so I'm actually taking advantage of this. I'm doing a lot of videos that I've been meaning to do. I have a long request list, and one of the most common requests I've gotten over all these past 10 years that I've been doing videos for YouTube has been the Wilcoxon book. And originally, I started a YouTube channel for my students so I could refer them to certain videos once they got home from their lesson. And then once I started teaching Skype lessons, that was super handy to refer them to the YouTube videos. So I recorded the whole Pratt book, in fact, all three of the Pratt books, because I've been using those to teach for over 40 years. And I also have been using the Wilcoxon book to teach for 40 years. But personally, I find the Wilcoxon book a lot more difficult than the Pratt book, just as far as phrasing and just some crazy stickings and things like that. But I use it to teach constantly, especially for my jazz drum students, because the language is all contained in that book. In other words, the language of jazz drumming, all the rudiments, the stickings, the swing, the drags, the roughs, the flams, the accents, everything like that. So the book I'm going to talk about today is this book. It's pretty much a masterpiece. There's probably a new cover. This is my original book from when I was a kid in the 70s, learning this stuff. And all the solos are great. They're all different and challenging. There's a number of solos in the book that are kind of drum set-ish solos, like kind of Dixieland. They use cowbells and wood blocks. I'm not going to record those right now. I'm going to record the 27 other solos that are in the book that don't call for all that extra stuff. And at a later date, I'll set up a small drum kit with that stuff, and I'll do those too, because those are great as well. But with the setup I have now, it'll be kind of difficult. So let's talk a little about the book and how to practice it. One thing I was saying before about the jazz component of it, in the old days when you had all the great jazz drummers, bebop was being born. There was one book all those drummers used: Philly Joe, Joe Jones, Elvin Jones, Max Roach, and it was the Wilcoxon book. If someone asked them about what they practiced, and they'd say Wilcoxon, and they'd actually carry around the book with them, and they'd play it with other drummers. It's pretty neat. I've had a few teachers tell me this. Joe Morello and I used to talk about it. Of course, he studied with Wilcoxon a bit, so he got the inner hand on that. But I did not actually work on the Wilcoxon book too much with Joe. Obviously, he's blind, and he did, remember some of the things, but I would play them for him, and he would approve or disapprove, and we would make, fix things, but we didn't really work on it, go through it. But again, I've been working on this with my students for over 40 years, so pretty familiar with it. So the jazz component is so important because you have to have a vocabulary when you play jazz, especially if you're trading fours. If you listen to Philly Joe Jones, that's a textbook example of, if you hear Philly trading fours or eights with Miles, you hear all that. That's all the Wilcoxon stuff right there. All the inflections. He's just doing it like Philly Joe, and he's substituting toms and stuff. But that's the feel. That's the style. That's why it's so important. So I wrote down a few things here that I want to discuss with you. The first thing about the book that you have to understand is that you need to play it in a relaxed manner. It can't be played in a stiff, kind of tight manner, like this. All the videos that I've put up about technique apply to this book directly. So please use those. You do not have to play it traditional grip. I do, because I grew up that way. I'm more comfortable. Match grip is totally fine. I have plenty of students who've played the book match grip, so it's not a problem. The other thing is you need to know all of your rudiments, and that's very important because the book uses all of them. There's even one piece called Swinging the 26, which uses every single rudiment in there. Okay? In the beginning of the book, there's a section that shows you all the rudiments, and that also gives you a number of really great exercises. I'm not going to play those for you now, but I would definitely suggest going over those. They're fantastic. And again, I use those with students. Let's talk about a few little quirks in the book. The first thing are the rolls. So Wilcoxon doesn't write a lot of five-stroke rolls. If you look at the book All American Drummer, there's some in there, but most of his rolls are 7s, 9s, 13s, 11s. So he likes that long squeezed roll, which is a 7. So in other words, that roll is notated with an 8th note pickup and then to the next bar. So it would be left to right or right to left. Now, there's a couple ways to interpret this roll. Mostly he writes it and 1, and 1, and 1, and 1. You can also do it kind of a longish 7, like a Pratt 7. So 1, 2, 1, 2, E and a 1. 1 E and a 2 E and a 1. So that's 1 E and a 2 E and a 1. It's starting on the E. So you can do either way. Either way is valid. It doesn't really matter. You'll see when I play it, I do both ways. Okay? Wilcoxon never talks about this. There's no introduction to the book. But traditionally, you'll hear people play it different ways. Okay? So don't sweat it, but either way is fine. The next thing are the stickings. I would try to adhere as close as possible to the stickings he has written. That's what makes the book so difficult. There's some really funky stickings, but it's great because it gets you ambidextrous and using, different your weak hand as your strong hand and so forth. Now, there's a few etudes that I did change the stickings because I believe they're typos. There's a couple things where you're coming off your left hand, and then he has a drag right away and it's fast. So I just switched that, but they're very, very, very few. And in fact, I'll try to notate those in the notes for each video that I did change a sticking. But maybe of all the 27 I just recorded for you, there might be 2 or 3 sticking changes of all of the etudes, and they're very tiny. And that's because I believe, again, they were typos, and obviously typos existed in those days, and they still do. Even in my book, there's broad strokes, there's typos. So don't sweat it, but try to do the stickings whenever possible. Okay? Now, the other thing is swing. So he calls it swing solos. You don't have to play them like, they actually swing by themselves if you try to play them straight. That's just the nature of it. He writes in little, those kinds of things with those rhythms. The dotted 16ths can be played a little more like the triplet. There is one etude that I did in here. Let me see if I can find it because we'll talk about it. I did do that just to show you. Yeah, it's called Swing and Accents. And I did it with the snares off. It's kind of like a Gene Krupa kind of thing, That kind of thing. And I turned the snares off on that, and I put the metronome on 2 and 4, and I'm actually playing it with a swing feel. I would suggest doing that with the ones that are in 8th notes, okay? And definitely put the metronome on 2 and 4 so you can feel that groove, all right? So that's the feel. It can, lean more towards swing, and you'll hear some of the etudes I did a little more swingy than others, okay? Dynamics. Unfortunately, he did not write many dynamics. There's some, but hardly any. So you don't have to just play it loud and louder. Those aren't your 2 dynamics. You can play a little quieter. My general dynamics are mezzo forte, and the accents then will be forte, and then I'll do some heavier accents, fortissimo accents, and then sometimes I'll add a pianissimo and little things. Not too much, but don't be afraid to add some dynamics if you want. Okay. Now, I get a lot of questions on hand sound, right or left. Let's face it, no matter what we do, and I used to talk to Joe about this a lot, his whole thing was getting the hands to sound, the same, and he was incredible at that. But not everybody is Joe Morello, okay? So don't worry so much about getting the hands to sound exactly the same. And really, in my opinion, that adds to the character of the music and the personality of the piece. You don't want it to sound vastly different, but they're going to sound different. They're going to hit a little bit different on the drum. The sticks might be a few grams heavier than the other. The grip affects it. The weak hand affects it. So again, don't sweat that. It's not going to be perfect. And actually, if it was perfect, you'd sound like a machine, okay, and it would swing less. in my opinion. So don't sweat that. Now, I am using a click track for all of these. I know a lot of you have asked me to play some stuff on a snare drum for these things, so I did all of them on a snare drum for you this time. But today I'm using a pad for this little speech here because, my ears are kind of worn out and it's hard to hear the click and talk with earplugs. And you definitely want to use earplugs when you're practicing this on a snare drum. Okay, so I am using a click and I'm not using headphones or anything. I'm just putting it on and leaving it on. I feel like my time's good enough. It just goes straight through as a reference. So you'll be able to see a little bit of the light blinking and you'll be able to hear it slightly because it's acoustic like that. Okay. Don't worry about playing a little ahead or behind the click. That's okay because that's groove. You don't want to get off from the click. So sometimes I'm playing a hair ahead. Sometimes I'm playing a hair behind. Sometimes doing that within one piece. That's all good. You can do that. All right. As long as it's grooving. Good. All right. We talked about the stickings. I have that written down. You can add grace notes or flams, although I'm not doing that. Some people do it. I think that Wilcoxon wrote these with a certain thing in mind. I think there's one flam I added in everything I recorded just because it was a single note. And I feel like he probably meant to add a flam. It could be another typo. But other than that, don't start adding and improvising. These are his compositions and they're great just like they are. All right. Accents. So you need to bring out all the accents. They don't all need to be as loud as the others, but you need to bring them out. So you can sometimes bring them out just a little and sometimes a lot. Again, that is the personality of the piece. And you want to add that. And you can do that with different dynamic levels. So I'm going to post these all at once. I really hope you enjoy them. They took me maybe 2 days to record them all. I am familiar with them. They're great. I would suggest those of you stuck at home right now for a while, you start working on them. They will definitely make you a much better drummer. So take care and stay safe. Thanks.